Hello, dear audience. Hello, dear participants. My name is Tobias Sofke, and I'm the Congress coordinator of this year's 24th Humanitarian Congress. And before this day ends, I would like to take the chance to recap the last days and thank everyone who made this event possible. In the last 3 days, we have heard 9 exciting panels with over 40 outstanding speakers, which have not only enriched the Congress, but also, and I'm sure about that, the humanitarian debate. But let me be honest, our title, Feminist Humanitarian Action, from Affirmation to Transformation, was quite a challenge for us. We know that we have hardly been able to present the many facets of the feminist debates, and that it needs more than just this Congress dedicated to this important topic. We also know that there are still many barriers when it comes to feminist approaches, but we hope that this Congress was able to help us to initiate external, but also internal debates and to look at them from new perspectives. We hope that this will enable us to identify solutions to those many challenges ahead. Having said that, I would like to thank the members of our steering committee. Without the work of Médecins du Monde, Médecins Sans Frontières, the German Red Cross, and the Berlin Medical Association, this Congress would not have been possible. I would also like to thank Oxfam Germany, which was again a very valuable partner. Furthermore, we strive to become more inclusive every year in order to give as many people as possible access to this Congress. We were once again able to rely on the help of Handicap International, who supported us in the implementation of those necessary measures. So thank you very much for that as well. Before I finally hand over to our next chair and the panelists, I would like to thank my great team and especially Lina von der Ahe. I think with her outstanding work, this year's Congress became what it became. So thank you, Lina, who's with me in the room here. Now, I don't want to steal any more of your valuable time. I wish you an exciting last panel on the world's hunger crisis and its consequences for humanitarian action. Thank you for attending and see you next year. I hand over to you now. Thank you and goodbye.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to this last session. Thank you all for joining us. It is an honor to have you on our panel. My name is Shimelis. I'm country representative of MDM Germany in Ethiopia and host of this panel discussion. Today, we have amazing panelists. You cannot miss this last session. It's an important topic. We are discussing on global food crisis. The title of our session is The Price for Hunger. We'll take a few moments for each panelist to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their background on the topic. But before that, I have few information or announcement for our audience. We encourage participant audience to tweet on our Twitter account, #HC Berlin. We also welcome comment and questions. You can post your questions on Q&A of this Zoom. And you can directly post your questions. If we have time, we may attend few of your questions. Please send us as much question as possible. I would like also to give you some information about the features that are available on this panel discussion. Live translation is available French from English to French. If you want to attend this session, this panel discussion in French language, please click the button, the globe button on your window and then select French. And in addition, we have live captioning that will be in the send to people who are interested in. A link will be sent by the support team through the chat. Now I give a time to our wonderful panelists. So I will start with Jessica, Professor Jessica. Welcome to this panel. We are happy and delighted to have you. Could you please tell us about your background and also the connection with this topic?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Jess Fonzo. I am a professor of food policy and ethics at Johns Hopkins University in the United States. And I've been working on issues of food security and nutrition and really the area of healthy and sustainable diets for about 20 years, hence my gray hair. Yeah, very, very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, welcome to the panel. We're delighted, and we're going to hear a lot from her about the topic. And now I give the mic to Ruth, also to briefly tell us about her background and experience. And
thank you very much for inviting me to be on the panel, and everyone should know that it's the very early hours of the morning in Sydney on Friday at the moment. So excuse me if I lose focus. I'm a bit of an outsider in terms of this panel. My expertise for being here is around feminist theory, but I also teach in the field of global social policy. So I'm very much aware of the key issues, particularly from a gendered perspective, but in terms of the SDG, the MDGs, SDGs, and the entire sort of scope of humanitarian engagement. And also I'm very much involved in sort of post-colonial theory, so I might bring a little bit of that into my analysis. But thank you very much for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
thank
Did
you.
I say where I was from? The University of Sydney, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you also for staying after midnight
Awake.
just to support us, and we appreciate that. Now I give the mic to Farida. Farida, would you please briefly tell us about your background? I think we have lost her. Farida, are you there? Can you hear me? Maybe there's an internet problem there. When she come back, we can get back to her. Maybe we'll move on. I would like to give a brief introduction to one video. Last year, we had a colleague from Kenya who did a presentation on WASH forum. She's working currently in Kenya. As you know, East Africa is hit by the drought, and she shared with us video, and they shared with us also how devastating the situation is in that part where she is operating. I would like to take a few minutes to watch this video, and if Farida is back, we'll give her opportunity to introduce herself afterward. The technical team will help us to show the video. Thank you.
I'm Amina Isako. I work with PASIDA in Kenya. I was a speaker in last year's WASH panel of 2021 Congress. To my fellow colleagues in the audience, I would like to share the disparate situation of my communities: drought, hunger, and fear of starvation. I know this is happening in many communities and areas around the world. Besides immediate support, humanitarian aid needs to change and improve as the need will rise. Thank you.
Thank you for the technical team. And also thank you, Amina, for sharing this video. It's really horrifying and sad situation. She also shared a comment saying, how can I document the biting face of droughts? That was her statement to our colleagues during the communication. How can I document the biting face of the droughts? It's really sad to see this picture. It's similar also here in the Somali region, in Somalia, in Sudan, and East Africa. We see this daily, but we are also limited in our support options. It's important that we do not forget the suffering of the people behind systematic look and figure that we are going to discuss in this panel. We are facing unprecedented hunger and nutrition crisis in different parts of the world, in Horn of Africa, Yemen, Afghanistan, with disastrous impact on the lives and well-being of and the health of millions of people. We have just heard from Amina, but we know already this is happening in many parts of the world. And this panel, we want to look into this crisis context, get a clear understanding of the magnitude, prognosis of the future, and also the reasons. We all know conflict, climate change effects are drivers and reasons for such droughts and poverty, and they are now being worsened by the COVID-19 impact and also Ukraine-Russia conflict. But in this panel, we would like to look into a bit further beyond the explanation and tackle the root cause of the problem. We have amazing panelists who are going to give us insights on the topic. So without taking more time, we'll go now to discussion. Unfortunately, we have lost one of our panelists. Farida, are you now there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I may get lost anytime because I'm in a village.
Okay. Good to have you back. So I'll take this opportunity. I think I will not go further. First, I would like to give you a chance to introduce yourself in case if we lose. I mean, if it's not video also, you can continue with us audio, but at least let's first try to get information about your background. And I know, but for our audience. Thank you. Thank you, Farida.
Okay, good evening. I'm from Bangladesh. My name is Farida Akhtar. I'm Executive Director of a policy research organization called UBINIC in Bangladesh. And we have been working on food sovereignty, women's rights, and particularly biodiversity, seed saving, and so nutrition comes very much in our work, and we have a feminist perspective into all our work, and we have a ecological agricultural movement called Naya Krishi Andolon in Bangladesh. So it means biodiversity based farming system. So I'm very happy to be with my co-panelists. They are people, and I'm very happy to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Farida. Good to have you. So now we'll go to the discussion. We start with Jessica. Will give us an overview of a basic understanding of the current situation. Experts and researchers state that the global food and hunger crisis reached unprecedented catastrophic level. Would you agree with that? Could you tell us more about the global situation? What are the common denominator and difference in the current crisis, taking into consideration the agro-food system perspective?
Great, thank you so much. I think we are at an unprecedented time for global food and hunger. I think many of you know already, and just from the video, hunger has been increasing for the last 4 or 5 years. It's increased from about 8% pre-pandemic to almost 10% this year, reported by FAO. That's about 828 million people. It's worse in the sense that about 2.3 billion people, or about 30% of the world's population, are considered moderately or severely food insecure. compounding this is the affordability of diets. About 3.1 billion people can't afford what is considered a healthy diet, one that meets nutrient needs and is health protective. And compounding this is these burdens of malnutrition that we were once making progress on, particularly reducing childhood stunting. But now we're seeing a reversal of those numbers, and things are starting to worsen, along with a rising prevalence of childhood and adult obesity in the world. And that puts people at risk for non-communicable diseases. So the outlook is not good. And of course, food systems play a huge role in addressing that burden, but also undermining the progress we've made. I think many have talked about the 3 C's: COVID, conflict, particularly Ukraine and Russia as being big breadbaskets, and climate change, these 3 C's impacting the 5 F's: food, fuel, fodder, fertilizer, and finance. So we are really at a critical time. And of course, as you know, Shamelis, the Horn of Africa is particularly affected, massive droughts. A lot of places are having extreme weather events. Where Farida lives in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, I mean, these extreme weather events are just completely wreaking havoc. Significant mortality, significant morbidity. We are just at a really fragile time period in the world, in world order, and how we govern food systems. So I think it's that we've seen this before at certain levels, but compounding issues of conflict and a pandemic, we really are shortening our window to act on climate change. And we are going to continue to see a lot of these extreme weather events hit significant proportions of the population. So it is a unique time in the world, and one that requires a lot of action and governance. Sorry to set off this panel being very depressing.
I mean, you have brought a lot of knowledge to us. I just want to go back with the same question. Are we dealing with market crisis and not food crisis when we talk about the system? You mentioned the system.
I think it's both. I mean, we produce enough food to feed the world in aggregate. It really is about equitable distribution. It's about food waste and loss. It's about people's ability to be able to afford a diet, get access to those diets physically, economically, socially. The food system sort of is working at a very crude level, in that the Ukraine and Russia has kind of thrown a wrench into a lot of that, as being big bread baskets for wheat and safflower oil and other things. So I think it's both. It's a food and a market crisis that has, of course, poor populations are really feeling the burden of these multiple crises.
Thank you, Jessica. We'll get back to you. Farida, you're working with many different organizations, farmers, women, and establish a bigger seed bank in Bangladesh. Can you share from your and Ubing perspective what challenges or struggle you face in the current context and system? For example, with multinational corporations. What are your experiences and what are your main points of criticism and action?
Okay, thank you very much. And I thank Jessica for giving a broader picture on that. And just to add to what Jessica has said, the reason that we are not having enough food for all the people, that we were given a false solution from the beginning called Green Revolution. And that we have to have the chemicals, we have to have laboratory-based seeds, and we have to have all this market-oriented, operations. So farmers does not matter. If there are corporations to produce food, that's enough. So I think green revolution is now in Africa, and it has destroyed Asia. And in Bangladesh, we have experience of last 50 years with green revolution. And through this process, we have seen the loss of seeds, lots of biodiversity. Bangladesh is a small country, but it is situated in a place, where it has lots of diversity of food. And we since 1992, Ubinik has started this community seedwell center with the Naya Krishi Andolan people. And we have seen that farmers can still collect the seeds that they have lost. And it is through the women. And, I bring the feminist perspective to it here now, that it has been the knowledge and experience of the women that helped to bring back lots of seed that we have lost. Bangladesh used alone. And now we have brought back 3,000 varieties. And also women are like sharing among themselves. Like there are now 300,000 farmers working with us, and they are producing diverse food. So if you talk about nutrition and food, it comes through diversity of food, not monoculture or same kind of food that corporations are offering. Unfortunately, our government is taking the suggestions by the corporations. So only 100 varieties are supported by the government to cultivate in the rice. And also all the vegetables are hybrid and HYV, which require fertilizer and pesticide that destroys the nutritional value. So we have maybe food security, but not enough nutrition. 70% of the Bangladeshis cannot buy healthy food. And also they do not have access. But the rural people, they can collect, if the environment is safe, then they can collect the edible, plants, that is part of their food. So food does not mean only rice and wheat and maize or some, that is industrial food that is given in our super shops. But food is what is available to the farmers at their village, in their surroundings, and that must be preserved. So our seed well center and the work with seed is very important. And our women say that, sisters, keep seeds in your hands. And that is your empowerment, because then you can control food production. So food production will remain in your hand if you can keep seeds in your hand.
Thank you, Farida. Thank you. We'll get back to you again. I have a lot of questions, but I don't know if time will allow us, even from your now response, many questions. Just one advice, just in case if you have a communication problem, maybe you can switch off the video and you remain audio. But now it's okay. The last one was okay, but in between it was shaky. I'll get to Mark. Mark, as humanitarian and a researcher, can you help us to understand what are and how humanitarian actors are reacting in the crisis? Are they alarmed enough? Would you say that humanitarian actors are prepared? Do we have the right tools approach, such as anticipatory action? I give the mic to you.
Thank you, Ato Shemales. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. Mark Cohen is my name, and I'm a researcher at Oxfam. I'm based in the USA, but I work very closely with my colleagues at Oxfam Germany as well. So thank you for the question, and thank you to Jess and Farida for really setting the context as well as the video. And we see in that video not just the suffering of the animals as well as the humans, but those animals are a source of food in the form of milk and meat, but they're also the assets of the pastoral peoples. I mean, this is their savings. This is their what assets they have. And when those animals die, that is devastating the livelihoods of pastoral people. So now, in terms of the question, I would say the level of concern and alarm, I think, is quite high among humanitarians, but the tools are not working very well. There was knowledge of this terrible drought in the Horn of Africa. We knew it was coming a year ago, but we have systems that react. We don't engage in anticipatory action. And we have a humanitarian system that is based on voluntary contributions. You know, the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas, the governments that belong to that are assessed a mandatory fee, but the humanitarian system is it's a begging bowl, basically. So if donors provide the resources, then the system can react in time or perhaps engage in anticipatory action. But we don't engage in preparedness. We don't engage in setting things up in advance. And we talk about early warnings. Well, we had early warnings of this food crisis, and but still the resources are not there. They are starting to come in for Somalia, but in Kenya and Ethiopia, where you are, Ato Shemalis, the resources are inadequate to address the situation. So I would say no, the tools are not fit for purpose.
Thank you, Mark. And you're right. In the beginning, we had this hiccup with Farida, and skipped you without notice. Thank you for bringing also the introductory part. And now I will go to Ruth. You're not a nutritionist or humanitarian expert, but you are expert on global social justice and feminism. In our discussion earlier this week, you mentioned food insecurity is a key indicator for poverty. Please share with us your perspective and analysis of the underlying structural and systematic root cause of the factoring in the catastrophic situation we are in.
Thank you, Shemalis. I guess I was asked to be provocative, so I will be. If we go back to root causes, then I think it's really important that we understand that for much of the global south, the experience of colonization is a root cause of contemporary poverty. Colonization not only disrupted cultural and social structures and national borders, it displaced peoples from their traditional lands and food production. And for many countries, it also imposed patriarchal structures that directly affected the status of women. Resource allocation by colonizing countries, resource exploitation by colonizing countries at the time of industrialization in the global north set post-colonial countries back from the capacity to build wealth and redistribute wealth within their own borders. And it created ruling elites, and long after decolonization, multinational corporations based in the colonizer states continued to affect a country's capacity to create its own wealth due to the dependencies via loans and limited capacity to build appropriate welfare states. And I guess one of the key things that I have been writing about for years is that the only way that poverty is really addressed is to address inequality within a country. And if you don't have the capacity to build an appropriate welfare state to protect people from catastrophic but also persistent poverty, then you rarely have capacity to address inequality. And I guess, to some extent, this understanding or perspective does inform international assistance, particularly for many NGOs that are based in the former colonizing states and the other countries themselves that were the colonizers. But the problem with that is it often leads to a kind of form of neo-colonization with the intention of addressing inequalities in a comparative economic wealth, but not necessarily in sustainable ways, and that recognize the agency of those that they seek to support, and not necessarily addressing gender inequality as a means of addressing poverty. One example I'll just quickly describe is actually relates to Kenya, where I found the footage really shocking, because I do agree with Mark that that's not just a period of time without animals, it's the loss of investment and status and all sorts of things by losing herds of cattle and goats. And one of my PhD students did a study with a Maasai community in Kenya that revealed really interesting innovations by local women that who created ongoing informal education through collective efforts to ensure they protected their own food security for their families. And what was interesting was that the Global North NGOs that were coming into those communities didn't really recognize these intrinsic educational values of such collectives, of women working collectively together. And I'm sure that Farida has probably got lots of strong views on this, given she's obviously involved in that very grassroots women's work of addressing their own food security. And I think one of the critiques of many feminists from the Global South is this process of NGOization that takes away from the capacity for grassroots building of sustainability in villages like the one in Kenya that I mentioned. And I guess the other point I'd like to make, which everyone probably knows, that 43% of agricultural labour in the world is done by women. And 50% of the land mass in the world is the lands of indigenous peoples. And I think the work that Farida and her team are doing around food sovereignty is a really key part of the feminist movement to ensure that those communities can be sustainable in terms of food security. Okay.
Thank you, Ruth. I think if we get time, I'll get back to you about this Kenyan experience you mentioned, especially when we talk about the solution. Maybe you can illustrate more how that will help us to pass on the message. Jessica, I will come back to you now. What are the future scenario? Do we have, what do you need, we expect? Is it climate change is going to have a worsening impact? Are institutions like UN body, governments sufficiently aware, well-informed and prepared do they have plan for our world?
Yeah, I mean, I think the quick answer to both of those questions is yes, things are going to potentially get worse if we don't take action on climate. And yes, I think UN bodies and agencies working on humanitarian issues are very much aware and deeply understand the potential consequences as we move forward. And I think many people are working in the space of a climate crisis at the moment. I mean, I think when we look broadly at what the climate change science and models and scenarios have predicted and have turned out to be true, and what they are predicting for the future, unless things change, it's going to get more difficult to grow food, and particularly in parts of the global South. So just quantity of food available is going to be a challenge, particularly with a growing population. I think we may have hit or are very close to hitting 8 billion people. It's predicted this week, I think, some point. So the demand is going to rise, particularly for nutrient-rich animal source foods, which are more intensive on the environment and ecosystems. At the same time, with more CO2 in the atmosphere, a CO2 fertilization effect, we know that the nutritional quality of some crops, particularly some of the major staple crops, will decline. So we're really at risk both in the quantity of the food and the quality of food with climate. So we need to take big transformative actions on the way we grow food, where we grow them, not extensifying into forestscapes where there's rich biodiversity and places where indigenous peoples are still hanging on to their places that are very biodiverse, and they are the curators and caretakers of the biodiversity on the planet. So we really need to change the way we do agriculture, the way we're growing food, where, and many of us, particularly in high income countries, particularly in the United States, let's criticize the United States, which is easy to do these days. We really need to change our diets. We consume a lot of resources. We are one of the biggest greenhouse gas emitters on the planet, and we just consume a lot. Food, materials, everything. So some countries need to make much bigger changes if we want to address climate change. And I think we're going to see that going into COP27. It's all going to be about adaptation, paying for damages, paying for the burden that many countries are now facing, that high income countries have put on other countries that are now reeling from climate change. So I think everyone is very aware, with the exception of a few deniers in the world, some being very detrimental to the climate agenda. We won't mention names. Well, we can mention names, but we just don't want to mention his name. But, I think, I think there's a lot of planning happening, but I think there's deep worry and stress of who's going to take more action and who's going to really own up to the responsibility. And that's the worry of at the moment. So, but these extreme weather events, multiple breadbasket failures, they were predicted and they're happening. And it's how do we ensure that humanitarian organizations are well placed to help and ensure social protection measures are in place for the most vulnerable and the most marginalized. That's the key, I think, for many countries, is how do we ensure that there's not more lives lost and that people are protected and out of harm's way.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. I will get back to you again. Mark, you have a dual, you're academic, but also you're humanitarian. Where do you see the main responsibility of humanitarian, and how far can humanitarian mandate really go?
Thank you for the question, and thank you, Jess, for, I think the last few things you said really help us get into addressing this question. I think we have this siloing effect. On the one hand, we talk about development, we talk about long-term sustainability, and then on the other hand, there's humanitarian action, which is to respond when there's an emergency. But there's been, I'd say, at least 30 years, maybe longer, of discussion about the need to link the two together. And now we talk about the nexus, the triple nexus, the humanitarian development peace nexus. The issue is we talk, less is done to really make these connections, but it's precisely what is happening in between crises. What is being built up in terms of capacities? Are there robust social protection systems? I mean, Ethiopia, where you are, Ato Shemalis, is a good example. There is the productive safety net program that really needs to be sustained and nurtured so that in times of crisis, that program can be the basis for action, and that it's really a national and local response. And since 2016, when the World Humanitarian Summit occurred and the Grand Bargain was issued and the Charter for Change, I mean, we talked a lot about localizing humanitarian action, and that's crucial. I mean, we have a system that's very top down. It's funded globally, and we as international NGOs often, parachute people into a response, but really it's what happens locally and nationally that's most important. And certainly in disaster situations, I mean, it's the affected people who lead the response. They're the first responders, and the local affiliates of national disaster management agencies then respond, and really the international system should be playing a supportive role. Now, in a huge crisis like the one affecting the Horn of Africa now, I mean, clearly external support is also important, but this is why at Oxfam we issued a report ahead of the World Humanitarian Summit, and we called it Turning the Humanitarian System on Its Head. It shouldn't be top down, it should be bottom up, with local people empowered to address those situations. And as Ruth has pointed out, I mean, the role of women, we can't dismiss that. Local humanitarian leadership includes leadership by women as affected people, and those who are managing household food security, household water security. So
thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Amazing. Thank you. I'll go to Farida. Farida, you have 4 decades of experience in this sector. You've been fighting, you've been trying to do a lot of things with learning. Who you think, who you are holding accountable, responsible? What role do women play? How are they affected? Why do you say they are key to a solution?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica and Mark, for bringing very important issues. And I will pick up one point from Jessica, that developed nations, so-called developed nations,
sorry to interrupt you.
A lot, and I think it is meat production, meat consumption, that takes a lot of land in other countries, in like Brazil and. Okay.
Now go ahead, because the video, maybe you can switch off the video so that we can follow your. Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So can you hear me now?
Very well.
Can you hear?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Very well. Go ahead.
So what Jessica said, that the developed countries, so-called, I will say developed countries, the so-called developed countries are consuming a lot. I think we lost again.
We hear you. We follow you. Continue, please.
Yeah. So, and I think it is the meat consumption that is affecting the climate, and also the carbon dioxide emission is happening more. So industrial food production is responsible, and we should say that it is capital will give you the food, not the farmers. In fact, industrial food production is only able to give us 30% of food that we are consuming now. Actually, 70% are still coming from the small scale farmers around the world, like Bangladesh. And I think it is very important that you mentioned that I should say about women. And even in climate change, I don't want to see women as victims only. It is that women's knowledge is not acknowledged, and also that they can still produce food, they can still contribute to the food production, and their contribution is crucial. And even in terms of
I think we have lost.
We also have to fight against this NGOization who only wants us to have fortified food. About your legacy.
Sorry, Farida, it's cutting. Maybe check your connection and we'll get back to you. I will move on to Ruth because of time. We'll get back to you. I think the connection is getting worse now. Ruth, back to you again. Hearing the input from your fellow speakers, what are your thoughts specifically from feminist perspective? Where do you see critical intersection or connection?
Well, I think that much of the connections have been established through Farida's perspective, but also the acknowledgement that women are important. And it's interesting, historically, development theories only saw women as a problem because they saw them as dependents rather than the actual workers who were doing most of the work. And I think one of the critical areas about why women are so important as a focus is that gender equality is not addressed through empowerment, and empowerment's become a really sort of predictable aspect of most development. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals and other actions, the empowerment of women is often the solution. But what contemporary sort of arguments have evolved for feminists is it's actually about rights, and it's about women's rights to own land, to have access to finance, to have access to technology, to have opportunity for education, and also leadership in what could be called food governance in the world at every level, from the grassroots right through to international institutions. And I think that given that this whole Congress, this symposium is about feminist perspectives, one of the key things to consider when you're talking about feminism is where does power lie, which goes quite well with your question of who's responsible. And for much of the world, power still lies in the hands of men dictating the global and local economies of most countries through neoliberal capitalism, which actually, from some perspectives, is seen as a form of ongoing violence against women because it excludes them from the benefits of those systems. And the other area that I'd like to raise that hasn't been mentioned yet is the domestic, although Farida did talk about the work that women do at home feeding their families, but it's also a site of invisibility of women in terms of analyses of poverty. Women within households are often not recognised in terms of the inequality within the domestic sphere. And the reality is that women do most of the work there, and also women suffer domestic violence in ways that really limits their capacity to maintain food security in the way that they traditionally have in many communities.
Yes.
So I think I could go on and on about the critical intersections, but there are a few things.
Yes, I think we are also running out of time because we have to go to the second part because of the time.
Can I just add?
Yes, make it brief and please, yes, please.
Yeah,
yes.
just I was trying to say that it is the industrial food production that we have to really confront, because it is cause of climate change, for carbon emission. It is the small scale farmers around the world who are eating 70%, more than 70% of food. So, and I think, we have to say that women's power in terms of preserving biodiversity, in terms of cultural diversity, and, we have to get out of this monoculture of mind, which is patriarchal, and it is capitalist system. So they want to have
I'll get back to you. You'll have one chance to when we talk about the solution. Thank you, Farida. So let's move on to the last part, because we have only. Sorry, I was muted. So now we will go to find some recommendation, solution, and also idea from you. As you know, the title of this Congress is Feminist Humanitarian Action from Affirmation to Transformation. So you have been passing on a lot of message, a lot of discussion, but we want action. We want this to bring in transformation in the humanitarian work. I'll come to Jessica. Do you think transformation can happen towards more just food, a cultural approach within the current framework and system? Can people-centered food system be an alternative? And please help us to understand. Make your answer brief, because I wanted to also. Thank you.
I would say we need significant transformation. I think the current global food governance is clearly fraught with conflicts of interest, lack of governance, laissez-faire approaches from governments. So I think we need a major transformation in the way priorities and the political economy of food systems. And Farida, Ruth, and Mark have all brought that up as, we've got big issues of who is in control and who has the power in food systems. And more, we need to be putting the power in the hands of people every day who are living their lives and having to make decisions, and particularly those who work in food systems and have inequitable livelihoods and unfair livelihoods. So we need a massive transformation. And the UN Food Systems Summit that happened last year, while it was a good attempt to try to draw attention, I think the world sort of missed that, and it was a missed opportunity in that, barely registered in the media. COP gets a lot more attention. So I think, and it didn't really resolve any of the governance issues that many people are deeply concerned about. So we need big transformation. I'm a researcher, so I work on data, and to me, one of the things I think is so critically important is the data piece and making data and evidence informed decisions. And science is critically important.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. That's good. I will get to Farida. Farida, you already.
Before I get lost.
Yes, no. I just want to give you one more chance to share your experience on this solidarity concept. Holistic and focusing on the elements of the biodiversity and food sovereignty. Could you please help us to understand what it means?
Yeah, actually,
very brief.
First of all, I want to echo what Ruth was also trying to include in the feminism, so like the feminist movement or the women's movement that is going on, it's sometimes only some issue based, that is again NGOization of bodily, like violence and other things. But food, taking away our food is also a violence against women. And seeds, also taking away seeds from women is a violence against women. So we have to organize and link to also human rights, what Mark is saying. So like Oxfam, and they are also now trying to get into it, but I think we have to do it more at global level, at regional level, at the grassroots level. And we are working at the grassroots level, at the village level. And our women at the village are very, very strong. And they're able to tell everybody that we are able to produce food. Don't disturb us with the companies. So
Thank you.
Corporations,
thank you, Farida.
come in. Yeah.
Thank you. Mark, what is your reflection on this from humanitarian perspective? What are your recommendations that needs to be changed in the system?
Just like the food system in general, the humanitarian system needs to undergo a fundamental transformation. As I suggested, as Oxfam suggested 6 years ago, it needs to be turned on its head. So it needs to be bottom up, not top down, linked to development and peace building, because so much of humanitarian need is created by conflict. And finally, funding needs to be no longer a voluntary system, but just like peacekeeping and conserving Atlantic tunas, it needs to be funded in advance, anticipatory funding as well as anticipatory action. And in the interest of time, I'll stop there. I could go on and on for hours.
Thank you. Thank you. You will all have one more chance, 1 minute each. But now let me go to Ruth. Ruth, from feminist perspective, what's your recommendation and narrative? How nutrition and hunger is an example of broader debate on global justice and need for transformation. Could you briefly advise us on this?
Yeah. Well, I guess everything that's been raised through this discussion relates to inequality and poverty, as I said at the beginning. And I would recommend that the rhetoric, the policy rhetoric of all the institutions responsible, and including governments that are official aid donors, move away from ideas of individual empowerment, which is very much inspired by neoliberal approaches, towards rights-based language. And I think Farida already talked about the relationship between human rights and women's rights down to a grassroots level that seek to address inequality, and particularly gender inequality. And there are, this approach is really important because, like Marx said, the hierarchical nature of the current system of redistributing wealth across the world fails to trickle down. But grassroots programs can really inform where resources are required to protect food security, for example. And there are many feminist movements across the global south, as we've heard from Farida, and they're very effective at that grassroots level, but they share a single demand of all feminists, which is about gender equality, and it needs to be supported by economic systems, including things like land ownership, management of local resources, equal opportunities as a lead in government, NGOs and international institutions, and as well as employment, gaining skills and education. But one of the most important things, I guess, from this symposium's point of view is that it must include a feminist analysis of what can be seen as food governance and control over production, supply and sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. Sorry to cut you short. You all have now one last chance. I will start with Farida. Farida, what would be one thing that you want your audience to take away from this panel? You have 1 minute. Have you heard my question?
One thing that, that we have to have solidarity. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Go ahead. Go ahead.
We have to have solidarity among the feminist, humanitarian, human rights movement, and also farmers movement to come together. And this is what has come out of this panel session, that if we talk about nutrition and hunger to go, malnutrition and hunger to go out of the people's sufferings, then we have to get together and stop this industrial food production and corporate control over food.
Thank you. Thank you, Farida. You have made it. Jessica, what would be one thing that your audience want to take from this panel discussion?
I mean, for me, it's just scaling up the support of humanitarian organizations and NGOs who are fighting the good fight and trying to help people get through this crisis right now. To me, I think that the need is huge, financially, capacity-wise, to really support these organizations. So to me, that's the biggest priority right now, to ensure that people are protected.
Thank you. Well said. Mark, what is your one thing?
I would just say the situation is not hopeless. And in particular, we need to recognize that people who are affected by crisis are not victims to be pitied, but they are human beings who can take action themselves with the appropriate support. And so the rights-based perspective that we've talked about throughout this hour is crucial.
Thank you very much. So Ruth, what is your wanting? You are muted, Ruth.
1:30 in the morning. I think I would like to pick up on Farida's theme of solidarity. And I think that solidarity is not just something that can occur at a local grassroots level, but like Mark said, it's solidarity about addressing the immediate crises, but the sustainable way to do that. And one of the key criticisms I have of, say, the SDGs and many of the agencies that work from those is that they're great goals, but they're not great plans. And I think this fits with what Mark was saying, is that there's a failure of saying who is responsible for achieving the goals. And I think if more women were involved in that capacity, then things would be addressed in a better way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are now about to conclude our session. Unfortunately, because of time, we cannot go far away from here. We hope we did not only give a good analysis and understanding of the systematic challenge, but also opened a window of transformation and inspiration and food for thought. One thing that has come clear: we need to change the way we think and act. And I would like to say thank you very much, all of you who have contributed on this panel. It was amazing. Because of time, we cannot go further. And also thank you for the audience who stayed with us until the end. Thank you very much. We end our session here, and a good night. Good day, good evening, good morning.
Thank you to you too.